Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Jonathan Cohn, and... Oh, hi, Unprofishional.
Jonathan, great to see you. How you doing? Nice place you got here. A lot of bookshelves and knock-overable things.
What are you doing here? This is my channel.
I know. Just hear me out. I read a book.
What?
One with pages. I know, but I was like, oh man, you like those. So I thought I'd come over, stop by, break down your door, try to fix your door, make it worse, pretend everything's fine, and talk about Warbreaker.
Warbreaker, as in Brandon Sanderson's masterpiece?
Masterpiece is a word.
Well, why don't you do a review with me? I'd love to hear your perspective on it.
Sure. I mean, I'm not super well versed in book reviewing. I mean, the last time I talked about books on my channel, it was more like complaining about a movie in disguise.
I mean, that's what most books, when you talk about books that are movie adaptations, that's usually what it turns into. But
yeah,
why don't you tell everyone how you got into Brandon Sanderson's books to start with, so that we know where you're coming from?
Okay, that makes sense. That is very logical. I'd say it was probably because, well, fantasy is rather entertaining. So really, the turning point was just over a year ago. Like, I had already read some fantasy books that I really liked. Like, I had read the first Shannara book, or Shannara, however you want to pronounce it.
Actually,
I say Shannara.
That's how you pronounce it.
My dad says Shannara, so I say Shannara.
Mm-hmm.
But I had already read that, and I knew I wanted to get into reading more fantasy. So at that point, you kindly offered to lend me your versions, your editions, your copies of books 2 and 3 of the original Shannara trilogy. And then after that, everything started going downhill. I knew Sanderson was one of your favorite authors, but even before that, I had heard of his name before, like it's been thrown around, and I had heard of like the Mistborn series, but I hadn't read anything. So after I finished Shannara and got distracted by some Star Wars books, you recommended that I start off with Elantris, which was amazing. I loved that very much. And then after that, gone into the Mistborn, which the trilogy was fantastic. And it's been a really, really long but good journey to this point, because some of those climaxes were the most page-turner-esque I have ever run into in a while.
It's kind of funny. For those of you who don't know, Unprofessional has this reading plan that when he reads, it's at a very specific point in the evening, and it's for a very specific amount of time for a very specific amount of pages. So if he's starting to really get into a book, it's hard because he's like, I want to keep reading, but I gotta put it down because that's a quota for the evening. So it's funny when you'll occasionally, if you see like a big spurt, okay, now he's really getting into it because he's gonna stay up late.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's always amazing whenever I run to a book like that. Like, unfortunately, it's been a bit more difficult to be super consistent, but because started a job and everything. But right. I've been doing my best to keep my reading going.
Yeah, that super consistent thing is a problem for me. My problem now is that I will go 2 days without reading anything, and then 3 days where I read and then 1 day where I'll read 300 pages. So I meet my goal of an average of 100 pages per day, but I just don't actually read it consistently. So I understand the pain there. But you recently, so you talk about reading Elantris and Warbreaker, and Elantris and Mistborn. You recently picked up Warbreaker and Way of Kings. Why did you choose Warbreaker first? And also, what are your thoughts on getting into the Way of Kings and the whole Stormlight Archive?
Well, you see, Way of Kings is kind of thick. So I was a bit intimidated to dive right into that. And also I knew that Warbreaker was like a standalone novel.
Yeah.
So I thought it'd be easier to just like a one and done. And there's not this 10-year series that I need to catch up on, and each book is 1,000 pages long at least.
Right.
And it's just, it would be quite the undertaking, and I wanted to start off diving back into Sanderson with something reasonably paced. But yeah, so going into Way of Kings, now that I finished Warbreaker, I'm very excited, but I'm also kind of nervous.
Yep.
Like, it is a huge, huge series. It's like the fantasy series that like everyone's talking about. Like, this is like the masterpiece of Brandon Sanderson.
Yep.
So it is intimidating, but I have heard great things. So it's a mixed bag. Like, I want to get into it, but I know if I do get into it, it's going to be like, oh my gosh, this is a huge commitment that I'm going to have to both catch up on and also be dedicated to for the next however many years until Sanderson finishes the rest of the books.
Right. And you're kind of lucky in that, for one, he does take a couple of years between books, and you're also lucky that there's only 4 books out currently. So it's not like The Wheel of Time where you have 14 books to read and that they're all completed.
Yeah.
It's only 4 at the moment, and so you have enough time that you could probably, depending on if you read one and then take a couple months off, you could still finish all the existing books before book 5 comes out, because it's going to be another year before book 5 comes out. So I was very unlucky that I read the Stormlight Archive right when book 4 was coming out, and so I just I wasn't there yet, and then I had them all in little mass market paperbacks, and then book 4 was only in this humongous hardcover. I was like, I don't want to get that, so I waited till they had the trade paperback out, and decided, it's still big and expensive, but it's not like the hardcover. So I got that, and it was a pretty cool read. And then the day I finished reading Rhythm of War, the mass market paperback came out, and I didn't realize it. And I was like, oh, come on, if I'd waited another week, I could have
that close. Oh man, that's annoying.
So from now on, I'm paying much more closer attention to release dates for everything. But I'm caught up on Sanderson myself, so now anytime a new hardcover comes on, I can read it, so I'm really excited. Yeah. But let's get into...
You already have all the backstory and everything.
Exactly, yeah. Although I'm still confused sometimes with some of his writing. But we'll get into that. To begin, as we mentioned, we're going to talk about Warbreaker. So why don't you give... You've written on your Goodreads a little bit of an overall thoughts, but why don't you tell us what you thought of the different plot lines and the book as a whole, and then we'll get into the more nitty-gritty.
Okay. Well, I guess starting off with the more big picture stuff, things like the world building, like as always, Sanderson is great at that, especially with the magic system, and I'm always impressed, especially with this book in particular, is I'm impressed with how he ingrains the magic system into the culture of the world. Mm-hmm. So it's not just the magic system. Like everything in Warbreaker is based on color, from the religion to the magic system to like the differences between the two kingdoms in the book. So it really helps bring the world together and make it that much more immersive, which I love. In terms of like the plot lines and all that, there are like 3 major plot lines, and there's like some like subplots going on in the background. But in terms of the major ones, Ceres, like who I think is like the main character, is like her plot line was pretty darn good. Mm-hmm. She, along with really all of the main characters, all changed a lot for each of their own narratives. Yeah. So you're able to get really invested, not in just who the character is, but how they're going to change throughout, like the challenges that they face. Mm-hmm. So with Ciri in particular, it's being like diving in headfirst into this kingdom that she was not prepared for in the slightest, and having to deal with that, especially with having to become queen all of a sudden, which is, is a slight task to overcome.
And she's a queen that's not even allowed to talk to her husband.
Yeah, it's like she is just locked away. Like everyone's surrounding her and like pampering her, but also sort of keeping her in her place, which is like a really interesting balance. So I loved her story, and how she dealt with being in the capital of Hallandren, I think is the name of the kingdom.
Hallandren, yep.
Yeah, Hallandren, yeah. And also how she interacts with all of the people that she meets in this new culture, in this new world that she's unfamiliar with. But there's also a character, Lightsong the Bold, who I love very much. He was such a witty and like lighthearted, but also really heartfelt character, especially later in the book. And I loved his plotline as well, because he's basically on the opposite end of the spectrum. He's from like the kingdom of Hallandrin. He's one of the gods, even like the returned, and he's sort of facing like welcoming this new queen that he doesn't know anything about, as well as facing some of his own personal issues, like his disbelief in his own religion that he's a god of.
Yeah, exactly.
Like that was a very interesting take, and I like that a lot. It added a really nice dynamic as well between him and his high priest. There was so much like good banter between them, especially with Lightsong always trying to poke at him to get his priests mad.
Yep.
It was amazing. It was hilarious. What was that priest's name? It was like
Larimar.
Larimar. Okay, I wasn't sure how it was pronounced because half of my brain was like, is this Spanish? 2 L's is a Y. But
Yaramar.
Yaramar. Yar.
This is one book where I know so the pronunciations work because I read it the first time in print form and then 2 times I did the audiobooks. So
I see.
And it's where I don't do audio, as you know, I don't do audiobooks that often. So when I do one, it's pretty shocking, and this is one of them because I already loved the book that much.
Yeah, I imagine like loving the book is a good catalyst for being able to get into like the audio form, since you're just diving back into a familiar story. But yeah, I guess the last remaining like big plot thread was Vivenna's.
Yep.
Am I saying that right? Okay,
Vivenna.
good. Yeah. So I have conflicting feelings about her story. It's really weird. Because technically, I should like her story the best. Because I'd say that she changed the most out of all 3 characters. Like, she goes from, like, protective older sister to this sort of... Well, I don't want to give it away in case someone hasn't read the book. But she goes through this dramatic change, this huge change in personality. Because at the beginning, she goes to rescue her sister. And because of that... like, she was the one who was originally supposed to be the queen, the one who was originally supposed to be, like, trained for Hallandrin. So she thinks she knows what the capital city is going to be like and how to behave there. And she soon learns some conflicting things that challenge her beliefs. So I guess, like... her story was good, but there were some things that left me a little conflicted.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was... I think I'm going back and forth between whether it's just a pacing issue or if there were some actual like characters in the beginning that I wasn't a huge fan of.
I personally, what worked for this plotline for me was the comic relief characters of the mercenaries.
Yes.
Who basically, anytime they can, they're making fun of Vivenna by messing with her. And so the whole time they were just like, you know what I hate about being a mercenary? And she's just like, oh, come on. No.
It's like, oh my gosh, these guys again.
And they're like setting up exactly. It's like the old "I told you not to trust me" trope. Like they're setting all that up, and yet she's like just not paying attention to it. So when the big reveals happen later, you're at the same time you feel what, and at the same time you're like, I should have seen that coming.
Yeah. I agree with that. I just think I feel like they should have gotten to that point faster, maybe, because I liked the mercenaries, but they weren't really challenging Vivenna's character very much. Like a little bit, of course, because they were sort of poking at her current beliefs and how they're being challenged in this new place. But I didn't really care for them that much beyond just comic relief.
Yeah.
And because of that, they weren't really characters I was invested in, more like just entertained by.
Yeah, I get that. It took the longest for me. Like, the first read through, all I wanted to do was read about Siri. That's all I wanted to read.
Yeah.
And so, like, I was, like, waiting. And Sanderson does these things where he basically, it's like every 3 chapters, like, he splits them up, the storylines up. So you're like, all right, I just read a Siri chapter. I got to read 2 more chapters until I get back to Siri. That type of thing. And so I was just waiting to get back to her. The second time I read through, I was like, Lightsong is hilarious, and I love
Yeah.
the depth of his story. And so I was trying to skip the Vivenna chapters again to get to Lightsong. The third time I read it was when I really appreciated what he was doing with Vivenna, because to me, I really like the pacing of it because he really is showing how betrayed she becomes, and how he takes her to a really high point and then takes her to the lowest point she could possibly go, and then takes her all the way back up to the high point. Like, one of the Star Wars books that I've read, Thrawn, does the same thing with one of its characters, where they're at a high point, they go to the low point, and then back to the high point. So I like when he does that, but it took time for that to work. And so maybe on a reread, that's why it works better.
Possibly.
But like naturally, series is naturally the most exciting because it's got the most intrigue and it's got the most, like, the stakes are the highest there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, with Vivenna's, yeah, maybe on a reread is like I feel like all of the elements are there for something for me to get really invested in, but the way it goes up and down, like in the second half, it sort of feels like it's repeating parts of the first half in a way, which I feel like they were a bit too similar, at least in the first, on that second rise, when she's sort of redoing the same exact actions, but this time with a new character.
Right. I just liked how you have the difference of the first time she did it, the guys were like they were the nicest, funniest people she could be working with.
Yes.
But in reality, they weren't that helpful. Whereas the second time, the guy she's working with, he's kind of mean to her. He's kind of like blunt, and he's not helpful, or it doesn't appear that he's helpful. And yet he's like really, honestly doing the best he could possibly do for her. So
yeah, I wish we knew. Yeah. I wish we learned more about him, to be honest.
Well, you will learn more about him eventually.
Eventually. Okay.
You will learn more about him.
I see.
Yeah. One question I had that I didn't write down on our script. Have you started noticing any of the through-line Cosmere characters? There's one character called Hoyd.
I finally noticed him.
Okay.
Because it was kind of hard to miss this time around. Because it was like, here's Hoyd. And I'm like, that's him.
Right. Like, I told you in Elantris, I was like, yeah, he has a little bit part there. And he has a little bit part in Mistborn. And you were like, I did not notice it at all. Because it was super quick. Whereas here, he has an entire scene where he's talking.
Yes, he does.
And he's like giving all his exposition.
Yeah, he's an actual character, basically.
Right, yeah. Okay, so he has way more to do in the Stormlight Archive books. Like, that's when he really starts taking off. But here's when people notice it more. And this is the first time I noticed him, too. So I like, he has this, like, wisdom to him. His very much, like, he knows a lot of things. So he becomes an exposition device. Which I like when characters do that. Like, Alanon in the Shinra books is very much an exposition device. Because he's, a traveling storyteller. Type thing.
He's the old wise one.
The old wise one. Yes, you always need that in your party. I guess one of the reasons I like Warbreaker is it tackles, like, the whole series storyline is a very obvious, like, fantasy. Girl is married off to this king in this unknown land and has to go to the new customs, and that's a very tropey thing to do. Having a god who doesn't believe in his own divinity is a very not often done thing.
Yeah.
That's very new, and so he's able to blend classic themes with newer themes, and it's able to create a really fresh dynamic in the book.
Yeah, it keeps it refreshing and new and intriguing. He always has a good balance between things that have been done, but like a new twist to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. So do you think you'll be sticking with the Cosmere long term now that you've read this? I know you have Warbreaker, Way of Kings to read, and you will read that. Do you see, like, I'm going to read the short stories and novellas and I'm going to get into this, or are you just still like, maybe we'll wait?
I think right now I'm still going on a book by book basis. Like I'm not quite at the point where I'm like I'm a diehard fan and I must read every single like pamphlet that Sanderson breathes into existence. But I am very interested in this universe he set up, and I am interested just in each book just on their own. Like I'm interested in seeing what the Way of Kings will offer, even like disregarding its Cosmere connections, even though they're probably going to be much more upfront in the Stormlight Archive series than they were in something like Mistborn. At least
the first Mistborn, they get more. The later Mistborn books, they get more.
Okay, yeah,
so.
Yeah. That's another thing. I've only read the first 3 Mistborn books, so I'd say right now it's still going on a book by book basis. Like if everything was already released for the Cosmere, I'd probably be the person, at least right now where I am, I'd probably be the person to ask, like, point out to me like the most important ones I need to read, and I'll read those. Because I am invested in the Cosmere as this really interesting book universe that Sanderson is building, but I'm not quite at the point where I need to know every single detail of what happens throughout all of the worlds.
Okay, I feel like you're at a place where a lot of the fans are. Like, you have the core fans, which are like we're gonna read everything he puts out. But the majority of the fans are more, I'll read it. We'll see how it goes. You know, I'm enjoying his works, but I'm not a crazy fanatic. So,
yes.
Like my brother-in-law, he reads a lot of what Sanderson writes, but he doesn't read it on release day. Whereas I'm the core fan where I'm reading it on release day. Shows the different levels of fandom, but we'll get you there. We'll
probably. I'm already at the place where I'm like, Sanderson has won me over as an author, so now I just need to get to the point where the Cosmere has won me over as a universe.
Ooh, that's a good way to put it. Oh, I like that. So before we go, can you give us a little plug for your channel? Tell us what kind of videos you make and why people should subscribe to you.
Shameless advertising. I like it. I am the kind of YouTuber that emerges from his cave every 2 to 3 months and releases this one, 10 minutes, highly edited video on whatever it is that I'm interested in at the time. So that the subjects can vary wildly. Like the last one was about Artemis Fowl, which is a book series that I hold close to my heart. But before that, it was like how to learn French, maybe. So each subject is something that I'm passionate about, so that's why I take so much time and effort into making it as concise but also dense as possible with my edits. So if you're interested in this sort of pseudo-animated style where I will rant at you for something that you may or may not be interested in at all, then come subscribe to my channel. Am I very professional? No, not really, hence the name of my channel, but you might find something that you like. So, and maybe, assuming everything goes to plan, a new video might come out this month, assuming that this video that we're currently recording is uploaded this month as well.
It depends on how our editing goes here as well. If you like entertaining videos, I can plug your channel because there's just the level of effort you go in to make little gags, and your dry humor is what makes it work so well. No matter the content. I don't care about 21 Pilots, but your video on 21 Pilots was super hilarious because of the humor that you put in there. So I recommend your channel.
Yeah, I put in a lot of work, so I'm glad it pays off.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the channel. This was a very different type of video than I normally do, but hey, this was fun.
Yeah, it was. I'm glad to have actually talked to you about Warbreaker, since you were the one who got me into Sanderson in the first place.
Yeah, and I'm glad I'm glad every book's been a banger. You haven't read a bad one yet.
Yes, I have not.
That's good.
And I don't think I will.
And I'll have to keep talking to you because I recently bought some Agatha Christie books.
Ooh,
so I'm
interesting.
Gonna be reading those soon. It's been a while.
Nice.
He's the one that got him. Unprofishional got me into reading Agatha Christie. Originally.
Swapping fantasy and mystery.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'm so happy. So thank you for coming on. And
yes, thank you for having me.
We'll have a link to his channel in the description. But until next time, I'm Jonathan,
And I am Unprofishional.
and thank you for watching.